In this world, terrifying stories have unfolded, stories so unimaginable that the mind struggles to believe them. Yet, they happened and became part of humanity's history. This is the story of 15 years on the desolate sand island, one of the most tragic tales history has ever known. We are beyond the screen, and this is the beginning of the story. In 1810, far from the eyes of the world, a group of slaves was abandoned on a remote island in the middle of the ocean. An island that held nothing but barren sands and a few thorny plants. No water, no food, and no means of escape. Their fate was to either survive or perish in complete isolation. The story began when a slave trader decided to rid himself of his excess cargo during a voyage across the ocean. These wretched human beings, shackled and powerless, were thrown onto the island. The traders believed that leaving them to die was a kinder fate than returning them to their homeland or setting them free. But the island, which seemed like a death sentence, turned into the stage for an unforgettable tale of resilience. 15 years of suffering, starvation, and madness. The group began with attempts to survive, but over time, bitter conflicts, dark alliances, and even stories of hope emerged from the depths of this hell. How did they survive? What happened to them, and what secrets remain buried in the sands? Stay with us, for we are beyond the screen, and this is just the beginning of the story. The terrifying story of the forgotten slaves, 15 years on the desolate sand island. In the early 19th century, during the brutal era of the transatlantic slave trade, the Portuguese slave ship Santo Domingo embarked on a fateful voyage from the East African coast of Mozambique to the plantations of Brazil. Over 100 African men, women, and children were crammed into the ship's hold, shackled in chains, deprived of dignity, and forced to endure the unimaginable horrors of the journey. The voyage took an unexpected turn in the Indian Ocean when a violent storm battered the ship, leaving it severely damaged. The relentless waves, howling winds, and constant rain made the vessel nearly impossible to navigate. The captain, facing the threat of sinking, ordered his crew to search for any nearby landmass where they could anchor and carry out repairs. After days of searching, they spotted a small, uninhabited island on the horizon. The ship, damaged but afloat, reached what is now known as Sand Island. The island was barren, with nothing but endless dunes of white sand and sparse, thorny vegetation. There were no visible sources of fresh water or food, only the harsh, unforgiving sun beating down on the desolate landscape. Despite the inhospitality of the island, the captain made a shocking decision. Claiming that the slaves were a burden and that their lives were expendable, he ordered them to be offloaded onto the island. The sailors dragged the shackled captives onto the scorching sand, leaving them with no provisions, no tools, and no means to survive. The crew then set about repairing their ship, ignoring the cries of desperation from the abandoned slaves. Once their repairs were complete, the crew sailed away, leaving the slaves to their fate. Survival on the desolate island. For the hundreds of men and women left behind, the island became a living nightmare. The initial days were marked by confusion and despair. Stripped of freedom and now even hope, they faced the cruel reality of their situation. With no food or fresh water, survival became a race against time. They scoured the island for anything edible: shellfish, small fish in tidal pools, or even insects. Water was an even greater challenge. When the occasional rain fell, they collected it in makeshift containers fashioned from leaves or hollows in the sand. For many, it was too little, too late. Dehydration and starvation began claiming lives within the first few weeks. Amid this struggle, a fragile social order emerged. The group banded together, pooling their limited resources and working collectively to improve their chances of survival. They built rudimentary shelters from the sparse vegetation and used what little they could find to shield themselves from the unrelenting sun. However, the psychological toll of isolation, hunger, and hopelessness began to unravel the group. Disputes over food and water broke out. Some gave in to despair, while others clung to a faint hope that a ship would someday pass by and rescue them. Years of suffering. Months turned into years. The group that once numbered over 100 dwindled rapidly due to starvation, illness, and internal conflict. The scorching heat, coupled with the lack of essential nutrients, left many too weak to move. Disease ran rampant, further decimating their numbers. Despite these horrors, a small number of individuals displayed extraordinary resilience. They became adept at fishing, crafting simple tools, and even developing methods to trap birds or catch crabs. These survivors shared their knowledge with the others, creating a glimmer of hope in their grim existence. As the years passed, the memory of their former lives began to fade. For the children who had been abandoned as infants, the island was the only home they had ever known. They grew up learning to navigate its harsh terrain and survive in its unforgiving environment. Discovery and rescue. By 1825, 15 years after the slaves were abandoned, the island's population had dwindled to just 9 survivors. A British merchant ship, navigating through the Indian Ocean, spotted the desolate island. From a distance, the crew noticed smoke rising, a signal fire lit by the desperate survivors. Curious and concerned, the British crew anchored near the island and sent a small landing party ashore. What they found shocked and horrified them: 9 emaciated, frail individuals, barely clinging to life. The survivors, some of whom were too weak to speak, recounted their ordeal in fragmented but haunting accounts. The British crew provided food, water, and medical care to the survivors and transported them to Mauritius, a nearby British colony. There, their story of abandonment, survival, and unimaginable suffering spread quickly, capturing the attention of the world. Legacy of the Forgotten Slaves. The story of the forgotten slaves of Sand Island became a symbol of the horrors of the transatlantic slave trade. It highlighted not only the physical suffering inflicted by this inhumane practice but also the psychological and moral depths to which humanity had sunk during this dark chapter of history. Though the survivors lived to tell their tale, the island remained a haunting reminder of those who did not. Today, their story stands as a testament to human resilience in the face of cruelty and despair, and a warning of the devastating consequences of treating human lives as expendable.